Okay, Mr. Chairman, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to Management Council, January 18th, 2021, 1 o'clock. Let's call the meeting to order and do a roll call, and then we'll approve the minutes.
Senator Driscoll,
Here.
Senator Guru,
Here.
Senator Hicks,
Excused. We'll find him.
Senator Kinski,
He's just getting signed on, Heather.
okay, Senator Rothfuss,
Here.
Representative Connolly,
Here.
Representative Gray,
Here.
Representative Greer,
Here.
Representative Schwartz,
Here, I think.
Representative Summers,
Here.
Representative Yen,
Here.
Vice Chairman Barlow,
Present.
Chairman Dockstader,
Here.
Senator Kinski.
Here. Were you able to hear me okay, Heather?
Yep, I gotcha.
All right, let's proceed then. Approval of the meeting minutes. Anybody had a chance to look those over? Senator Guru,
Move for approval.
is there a second? We have a second with Senator Rothfuss, moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? All right, let's get right into it. It's consideration of bill drafts.
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, we got some organizational issues we need to kind of clear the plate with first.
Sure. Yeah, let's get, yeah, that would help.
Mr. Chairman,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, I'd move that Senator Dockstader, President Dockstader, be named as chairman of the Management Council for the 2021-22 session.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye with the hand. Thank you. Those opposed? Thank you. I nominate House Speaker Barlow as the Vice Chairman of Management Council. We have a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Okay, thank you. All right, yes, we do have a phone to work with. Okay. All right, thank you.
Now, Mr. Chairman, the next motion that would be in order is the election of your 13th member. Statute provides that the other 12 members of Management Council pick this member. It is from the House and party opposite the chairman. So
Very
motion.
Nominations.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I nominate Representative Andy Schwartz.
Second. Representative Yen. Okay. And moved and seconded that Representative Schwartz fill that position. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Andy, you're on board. All right, here we go.
Mr. Chairman, one more organizational type of motion for Management Council to consider, and that is at the start of each legislature, you've got some historic standing or historic select committees that Management Council creates every legislature, and also some liaison positions. Those two historic committees are the Select Committee on Legislative Process and Technology and the Air Transportation Liaison Committee. You also appoint liaisons to the State Building Commission, State Retirement Board, State Employee Compensation Commission, and the Enhanced and Improved Oil Recovery Commission. And then, Mr. Chairman and members of council, it is also traditional to include within those motions to make those reappointments and to reconstitute those select committees to give the presiding officers the authority to make those appointments as well.
Well, thank you, Director Albrecht. I would ask that we leave it to the discretion of the presiding officers to work further on this if the speaker is agreeable to that.
I am, Mr. Chairman. The one question I want to revisit the two committees. So the liaisons is one issue. The two committees, are those also, they're strictly creatures of management council. So are we putting those off also, Mr. Chairman?
At the discretion of the presiding officers. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And, I've been thinking about this for a week, and I just want to throw it out there as the presiding officers think about that technology committee. One of the recommendations that came out of appropriations when we were there out of consultants was about a technology select committee as well, or task force, or whatever you want to call it, to look at kind of how we develop out our state's technology a little bit sooner, input from the legislature in the current process on technology. And then you think about blockchain technology and the fact that we have a select committee on blockchain and legislation. And I think that this body, management council, should consider sometime, and I know it's a large step, but maybe we consolidate all those three select committees into one. And then I really wonder if we're at the point in time in history where a standing committee on technology isn't an appropriate thing to discuss. And so I know the last thing we need is more committees, but I think because of the way technology has moved in this country, I don't know if other states do that, but I think it's something we should just contemplate as we move forward. So I would ask that the presiding officers, as they kick this around, just think about this larger, broader issue of technology and where it should be housed within our structure. Thanks.
So clarification, Representative Summers, you're saying, I hear you say consolidate, but adding, just let me make sure that I understand this. We walk away from it.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And consolidate select committees and/or create a standing committee that's a technology committee. I think there's a couple of ways you could do that. I just think it has become, we need experts in that field in these committees doing this work because some of us are not experts. And so just for your consideration.
Thank you. And as part of that consideration, we do have the chairman of blockchain on there, Senator Rothfuss. Corley Rothfuss, would you like to weigh in on any of this?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Representative Summers' discussion about the importance of technology, and I do think that we've probably underplayed technology. We create a lot of select committees and task forces to deal with specific technologies, and obviously we created a permanent standing select committee for blockchain and financial and digital technologies and innovation. And I think there's a strong role for that. I'd be reticent to roll together some of these committees like the Legislative Technology and Process, which is not really trying to tackle larger legislative issues, but is literally just trying to figure out, what's our best approach for communicating with the public. So it's very much a management council responsibility in that standpoint, as opposed to, I think, the larger questions of policy related to technology, where broadband, that I know Majority Leader Summers has been involved in, and other technologies outside of the scope of blockchain could coalesce. So looking at a standing committee or trying to figure out how to engage a standing committee might be a good approach for that. I think it is worth further discussion. But technology is obviously a very broad topic, and if there's focused technology areas like we have with blockchain, I don't know that we want to get overly broad at this point, but I think there's a lot to discuss there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Grew, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, question on the air service side. I didn't quite catch you when you went by that. What are you looking for there?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, those two select committees I mentioned, the Air Transportation Liaison Select Committee and the Select Committee on Legislative Directive process. Those are both wholly creatures of management council. And so we were looking for a reappointment, reauthorization of those two select committees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, anybody on the consolidation before we move forward? All right, before we do that, welcoming our newest members, Senator or Representative Schwartz, Representative Gray, would you like to say anything as you join the Management Council? Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman or Mr. President. But I just want to say I'm very pleased to be here and look forward to working with you all. Actually, I have a comment on the technology, if I may.
Please do.
Thank you. It's just when we were working with Barry Dunn, it was the consultant to JAC working on improving how we manage technology. That was one of their suggestions, that we have a committee that is more dedicated to technology issues that will make it easier for us to understand how to proceed with both what hardware and software we procure and how we spend our money. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really looking forward to collaborating and being on this committee. It's really an honor, and thank you for this opportunity to say something. And I look forward to talking about these items. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Senator Kinsey, Senator Hicks, would like to speak? You to the.
I share the sentiments of Representative Schwartz and Representative Gray.
Okay. Vice President Hicks, welcome. Anything you'd like to add? All right. All right, let's proceed then with our agenda. We have consideration of bill drafts here in front of us. And Mr. Speaker, will you be presenting, or you want to turn this over to Anna? How would you like to do this? Mute. Mute.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first bill, I got to pull up my agenda at the same time as I'm visiting with you. First bill up is the community college.
Yes. 0256 Gillette College.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So members of Management Council, during the Select Committee on Community College Funding, there was lots of discussions about actually how to deal with community college funding. In the middle of that was also a process which was initiated in Campbell County to per statute and following statutory structure to apply for a new community college district. And that has gone through. You can look at the bill. It's pretty straightforward. Commissioners put in an application. The Community College Commission reviewed that application, approved that application after the survey and the public comment, et cetera. And then statute requires the legislature to take that up. So because that community college task force or select committee was a creature of Management Council last interim, it felt like, there was no obvious place to send that bill and they had no authority to send that bill anywhere but Management Council. So that's why it's before you today. They did not, the select committee did not have authority to sponsor legislation. They only had authority to consider those different issues, and it would have to have gone somewhere else. So that's why it's before you today, and I'd be glad to take any questions on the process, the statutory structure that would put it here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Before we move to questions, my apologies to Representative Yin. I was glancing over the screen, forgot to welcome as well. Representative Yin, you're welcome to say greetings to the committee, and I apologize for forgetting my neighbor on the north end of the canyon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, it's quite okay. I'm very excited to be part of this Management Council and looking forward to be the second best mic on Management Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Summers, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Speaker, just a question on this bill. And I want to go back to what was the stated role, and maybe somebody can drag this out, Matt, or whatever. What was the stated goal of that select committee? And then because I thought, if I remember correctly, it was funding community colleges. And so as I look at this bill, I'm not convinced it's within that scope of that, frankly, within the scope of that work. So I would like to know what was the, written out as the intention for this select.
Looking for the roots of the legislation. Someone like to speak to that?
Probably Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I share Representative Summers' concern, and I've got this in front of me, so I'll just read it for those of you who don't have it. It says this is the directive from Management Council. Topics shall include, number one, revenue sources and methods of calculating stable and adequate funding for college systems for the long term. Number two, criteria and methods for how state aid payments are allocated to each college. Number three, goals, objectives, and programs the community colleges should prioritize and strive to attain. And last, number four, reasonable and effective interface between the community colleges and the K-12 public education system, as well as the University of Wyoming. So, Mr. Chairman, with those four things, I am at a loss to figure out how the creation of a new community college district fits within the charter that was authorized for that committee to look at. So I guess I share those concerns. I don't see where this bill fits into the charter that Management Council provided to go look at. I can forward that on if staff doesn't have that to the committee.
Probably be good to forward that. Follow up, Senator Greer or Representative Greer.
Yeah, I don't know if I was number one or number three, Mike, but I'll accept either one. But not to pile on, and Speaker Barlow's in a tough spot here, but I served on that select committee with Senator Hicks, and I share the exact same view. And we did have the courtesy of expressing that view when this was discussed within the committee, and had made some suggestions on how to move forward. Not opposed to that idea personally. I just have a little problem with the process right here. So,
further comment before we go back to Vice Chairman Barlow? At some point, Vice Chairman Barlow, would you like Anna to go through the bill, or?
Mr. Chairman, there's also the two chairmen of that select committee are on the call too, Senator Wasserberger.
Oh, I missed. All right. Gentlemen, would you like to come in, and I'll let Anthony bring you in somehow here? Let me look here. There you are. I got you. Chairman Nicholas, Senator Wasserberger, either of you? Senator Wasserberger, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I did not, nor was I a part of the creation of the Community College Task Force. That came to us through Management Council. And so ultimately, I was asked to be a co-chair, which I was very happy to do that. The bill was sent to us from LSO. We never asked to have the bill. The bill came to us, and we held a committee hearing actually at Gillette College. If you don't think that Gillette College doesn't impact the community college funding model, it does. And here's why. Because of Campbell County's assessed valuation at $4.1 billion, Campbell County and Gillette College would be totally self-sufficient if it was allowed to levy up to 4 mills. It would be one of the few community colleges out there that, because it is in a service area now where there is no mill levy on Gillette College. It is a part of Northern Wyoming Community College, and it does not levy any mills. if it levied mills to continue it as an independent community college system, it would return $4.6 million to the general fund because of its high assessed valuation. So if you believe that it should not be considered because of its funding, I just struggle with that issue. I believe that it is one of the few community colleges out there that actually pays for itself and would need no state funding, because $4.6 million for the students at Gillette College flows to Northern Wyoming Community College District. That money would no longer flow through to Northern Wyoming Community College. Gillette College Community College would not need any state funding. And if you looked at the future, our assessed valuation would have to drop by 80% before we would need state funding. So we save a lot of money by allowing this to happen. The other part of it is all we're doing here is in essence, allowing the people of Campbell County to vote on whether or not it wants to be a separate community college. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I believe we want to hear from Chairman Nicholas too. Could I have you, Senator Wasserberg, repeat that last part, that the vote? Could you explain that further?
Well, essentially all this does, this bill, all it really does is allow two things. One, the Campbell County Commissioners would be allowed to put this on the ballot for sometime this coming summer. And so the people of Campbell County would have to vote to tax themselves before it would become an independent community college district. And just to let you know that this is one of the toughest things out there. We have not had a new community college district formed in 52 years. The last one was Laramie County Community College. And so this is going to be a very high bar to pass. And then at that point in time, the county commissioners would order the county clerk to assess those mills. And those mills would flow back to the newly formed Gillette College Community College District. And it is one of the few community colleges in our 7, would be now 8, that actually pays for its own, that does not need state funds.
Thank you. Chairman Nicholas, did you want to follow up?
Sure, I'd be happy to. When we sat down and we looked this bill over and looked at what our directives were, we would agree that it's more of an indirect impact than a direct directive from Management Council. But it was a very simple issue for us to review, to consider, and to pass the bill forward. And as part of that, and we have another bill in the works that it's really not ready for prime time. And so the other thing that I'll hope that will be on your agenda is to continue this subcommittee and allow us to continue our work between now and the end of March. And hopefully by the end of March, we'll have another bill, or at least a draft bill to present. It was always our understanding that this select committee was basically a 2-year process. This was just kind of a low-hanging fruit that kind of landed in front of us, just to move the ball forward, because it would be a benefit to the funding model. But also what we're looking at is how, and in our draft bill, we look about what the role of the Community College Commission is in allowing or selecting a new college district, and how that works, what the criteria is, how our current funding model works, and whether or not there is sufficient community involvement or skin in the game. Part of the other bill, which is draft bill 256, talks about a statewide mill levy, and basically, right now we've got 7 districts and only 7 districts contribute, and yet there are classes in 22 counties. Only one county doesn't have some administrative buildings, which means that everyone else is carrying the water for those other 14, 15 districts. And it's just an important thing to do. Plus, we're cutting 20 million out of the budget of community colleges. If we want to continue the quality and makeup of what community colleges do, there has to be alternative sources of revenue. And those revenues are going to have to come from, we think, more community buy-in and more fees and other sources, so that it just is not a burden for the state to carry on the expense, because we've got to cut the overall course of state government. This looked like a simple step to move in that direction. And so we thought, even though it wasn't a perfect fit, the shoe it's a good thing to consider. And this is a mechanism to actually reduce general fund dollars at the same time, moving at the request of Campbell County forward.
Thank you. Before we leave the chair, so essentially this differs how from our other college districts, and noting that we just have the one Gillette College bill on the table, 256. Mr. Chairman, could you just help us? Oh, Senator Wasserberg, you'd like to explain that? Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Essentially what it would do, let's just assume that the legislature, both houses, vote approval for the Gillette College Community College bill. And then it goes to the county commissioners and they decide what the ballot is going to read. And then the people of Campbell County vote affirmatively for that. At that point in time, we would have 8 community college districts. We would have one more than the 7. But for the first time since Gillette College has been formed, we would actually be taxing the people of Campbell County. As of right now, we are not taxing Campbell County for their community college. So that's essentially the biggest part of what we are doing. And for the first time, we would have, not the first time, but we would have a community college that was totally self-sufficient on its assessed valuation of $4.1 billion and being able to pay its own bills.
That's the first. Let's hear from those who are up in that neck of the woods. Senator Kinski, Senator Driscoll.
I'd defer to Senator Driscoll. No?
Senator Driscoll's coming. We have the Vice Chair. Barlow, you'd like to speak?
I'll speak after Eric, Speaker.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to be clear. There's no motion on the table. The bill is just before us. And I guess if we were discussing whether Management Council wants to sponsor the bill or not, I understand that. So maybe if that's the question before us, whether it's appropriate for Management Council to sponsor the bill or not, that's fine.
Certainly.
Maybe
I want a little discussion, Mr. Vice Chair, before we made the motion, just so everybody understood why we have it on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to be clear about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. A couple more comments, and then let's consider if there is a motion. Senator Kinski, Senator Driscoll in that order, and then Representative Conley in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I want to not confuse the merits of the bill with just whether it's appropriate to be a management council bill. And I hear we're straining to make it somehow germane to what the select committee was appointed to do. The question of how we finance the community colleges is a big one and deserves more time and more deliberation. I think Representative Nicholas said this should be a 2-year committee. It should be a 2-year committee. We shouldn't be making any decisions at this point. We should have a thorough examination of the community college finance system, and to debate creating an 8th district in the middle of that unnecessarily confuses the issue. There's a lot of merit to what Campbell County would like to do. I just don't feel Management Council is the appropriate venue for this bill, nor do I think this is an appropriate time to move it forward. I'd like to see the whole topic go to education or some other relevant standing committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Driscoll, Representative Connolly in that order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got to agree with Senator Kinski that we're at process more than whether we're for it or not. And I do think it's probably more appropriate for it to come through another committee.
Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a specific question and then a general one that goes to the last two speakers. My specific question is regarding the funding formula. And the funding formula for all of the community colleges, where the money is then distributed out through the Community College Commission. So even if Campbell County can raise the funds to support a Gillette College, I don't think that based on the funding formula, that changes the amount of general fund that would go to the Community College Commission. And in fact, I think in that large 400-page report, it was intimated that it was possible that the other community colleges could be getting more money per student because of Gillette not getting any of the state funds because of their ability through their mill levy to pay their own. So could the chairs of the committee address that?
Let's do this. Senator Hicks, you had a quick comment. Let's take the chair's follow-up and then let's see if we have interest to move it into a piece of legislation for consideration. Senator Hicks?
No, I was just, I was on that committee also, and just, it's a little more complicated than I think that this played out. You got to look at changes in enrollment, but it would require statutory changes based on the current distribution formula and statute. So it's not a matter of just adopting this and then passing it. It would require statutory changes to the existing distribution because all junior colleges get funding through the Community College Commission. So if one of them was going to potentially be a standalone issue, I think it would take further statutory changes to accomplish that.
Defer to our vice chairman at this point.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So there's a lot of nuance in the current statute that requires legislative approval for a new community college district, which was brought into the statutes in about 1991 or 92. So quite a while ago and long after the last community colleges. If currently by statute, one, the legislature needs to approve a new district, but two, that a district is not eligible for state funding if it does not assess at least 4 mills. And I can assure you, for anybody on this call and any of my community, that Campbell County is what I don't believe the voters would approve a 4 mill levy to support a community college. Therefore, it does shift the funds away. If Campbell County would not approve 4 mills, not be asked to and not approve 4 mills, then there would be a different pot of money to be split up between the other community colleges. And the students that are eligible at Campbell County or in Campbell County at the new district will be taken out of that pool. So it would potentially, without further cuts from the legislature to the total funds, go there. So I think maybe let's just expedite this. If there's just discomfort here with this committee sponsoring a legislation of any substantive manner at this point, then this bill should be just tabled for no consideration by this, and it'll be brought back as a individual bill, as I guess is my view of it. It certainly is germane to the legislative role, because by statute, the legislature has to at least consider a community college formation. So whether this committee wants to, consider it or not, to me, that's irrelevant. The legislature needs to take it up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So chairs, follow up, and then we'll ask for some public comment, and then we'll see if there's some interest in moving it out of this committee as a bill. Co-chairs, anything else? All right. I think it's appropriate then that I can take public comment at this point. So what do we want to have in first? Mr. Mortz, am I getting that right?
Yes, hello, thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, my audio just came on and I did not hear the question. I was coming over from the YouTube video, which has a slight delay.
We're bringing you into the public comment period.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I don't have public comment at this moment. I'm just here in order to answer any questions that might come up in support the other members of the commission and answer any questions that I can help with.
Can you identify yourself, please? Title.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ben Moritz, Deputy Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission.
Thank you, Dr. Marchese. Mr. Volz, Joltz, am I pronouncing it right, sir? They've moved you in for comment.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, were you saying Larry Buckholz?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yourself and title and.
Yeah, Larry Buckholz, CFO of the Community College Commission, and like Dr. Moritz, I am here just to answer questions of the committee related to any actions to move forward with this bill.
Okay, let's proceed with any other additional comment. Anthony, would you bring them in?
Mr. Chairman, you have one other individual in, Sandy Caldwell.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Caldwell. I can't see my full screen here. Go ahead. Oh, there you are.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Dr. Sandy Caldwell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. We are only here to provide support for any questions that you may have regarding the process related to the request for Gillette College Community College District. Per the statute, our process, we did complete that process, and our job was to make sure that we presented that and submitted to the legislature for consideration, however you might choose to move forward a bill. So we're only here to provide support should you need it for any part of the process.
Thank you. Others, Anthony, would you bring them in?
Mr. Chairman, that takes care of public comment for this topic.
Thank you. We've had a good discussion on this. Would anybody like to move the bill? Would anybody like to move this bill? Seeing no interest. At this point, we will, go ahead. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are two members in this select committee that are no longer serving the legislature. There is work that we would like to do as a chair between now and the end of session. So I was just asking for direction from Management Council in terms of having new members appointed to it. If it's the intent that we continue to work in our process. We met 3 times last interim. There were late appointments. Basically, we didn't even get the call to order until about the 1st of July. Our first meeting was in August. It took about a month and a half just for LSO to assimilate the background information and materials, which are a large binder full of materials, just to learn the background and history of this. So if we do have new members, it would be useful for them to begin familiarizing themselves with that information as we proceed with we've got at least one bill drafted and several others that are in line of sequence to continue the work of the committee. And so I just want to know what the pleasure of Management Council is and how we can, and if we can, move forward between now and the end of a session.
Thank you, Chairman. I would probably say there is interest in an individual bill, but let's go first to Senator Grew. He had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was my question. Is there interest in keeping the select committee moving forward and working this issue? Frankly, I'd like to see that. I think it is going to take some more time to flesh this whole thing out. And if we're going to come up with an individual bill, so be it. But I'd just like to hear any other comment in regards to that.
Chairman Greer, and then I think the vice chair was putting up his hand. Chairman Greer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I served on this committee as well, and everybody knows I hate task force and select committees. However, this is a big topic. A lot of good work has been done on this. When Chairman Nicholas references a bill draft, there is a rough outline of, I want to say about 4 to 5 very good ideas that are past conceptual that should be worked and need to be worked. And so as Chairman Nicholas was asking, Mr. President, he'd like to get the committee refilled And then I think, given the discussion that we had here today, is where does this committee go? Do they go to education? Do they go to appropriations with their work product? And I think we need to make sure that we are clear as management council so we don't have this uncomfortable discussion again. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that is probably the most important question we have. The timing of the work that is being proposed by Chairman Nicholas and its availability to either management council to sponsor a bill or go to a standing committee, because we won't be in the interim, for another committee to receive a bill to be considered in the 2021 general session. So it seems to me that the only option, or the most obvious options, are individual bills again, unless a House Education Committee or some other committee wants to take up certain parts of the bill or of the ideas, the 5 ideas that Chairman Greer spoke of. So I guess maybe a little more about what actually timing is, and then sponsorship would be. And have the same conversation we just had about the Gillette Community College one in a month, if there's no committee to send it to for the 2021 general session. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I do believe, after having served on appropriations for 4 years, I really do believe we need to have this committee continue its work on how do we fund community colleges, how do we find sources of funding, because you can all see where the direction we've been heading in the past. And so I think it's important to continue that work. And I don't have an issue with a bill later coming to management council and us sponsoring it. I simply don't. I think if there's a bill that's ready, nearly ready, and needs to be worked, then we assign a couple more members, they finish that work, we take a look at the bill, and it could come prior to a March session. I don't have a problem with that. That would be a question for the committee itself, frankly, if they would want to do that.
Well, you've opened up one more option following the Vice Chair's discussion there. Vice President Hicks and then Senator Wasserberger, in that order.
Yeah, so I do agree with the Representative Greer. I think there's some good work that's been done. I agree with the co-chair. It needs to continue. And if my recollection serves me correctly, the Wyoming Community College's standing committee is the Appropriations Committee. So I would recommend that they would be the committee that takes any of these bill drafts up. The other question that I have, Mr. Chairman, is whether we want to just reconstitute this as a management council action, or whether management council should sponsor a bill establishing this task force, which would be my preference. And that would be the direction that I'd like to see us go. But I do think it's vitally important to continue the work.
Senator Hicks, follow up then, you want the management council to continue and to designate that task force? No?
No, I would recommend that the standing committee that any bills report to is the Joint Appropriations Committee, because I believe the Community College Commission is underneath the JAC already, and that's the direction I would recommend that we go with it.
Community colleges through JAC, in that order. Senator Wasserberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And I will say to management council that we're getting into some very, very difficult decisions if we try and figure out how we're going to fund community college districts and their service areas. And those choices are not going to be very pleasant and not very popular. So I just wanted to put that out there that it's going to be tough, very tough.
As one who's overseen this, Senator Wasserberger, what do you think about Senator Hicks's scenario, community colleges through JAC?
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, the good senator from Carbon County is, at least in my mind, absolutely correct. The real problem with when we received this as co-chairs, the Gillette College application, it came from us from LSO. We didn't ask for it. And at the end of the last meeting, we didn't know where to go with it. So it was decided that we would come back to management council. If you specifically name in statute and create this task force for the next 2 years, then ultimately you will allow us to work with the appropriations committee, and that to me is where it should go. And having served on appropriations, thank you, Mr. President.
Representative Conley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments. I do remember when serving on JAC that the Community College Commission came through JAC in order to discuss funding. And not curriculum, there was no coordinated effort between and among, or there was not much coordinated effort between and among the community colleges in terms of curriculum, courses offered, etc. And the reason that the community colleges came through JAC was the desire for state general funding in order to help support them. But the reality is, over the years, we have taken a much kind of stronger look at a unified community college system. That if we're going to be using general funds rather than just community district funds to support them, we should be looking at what they're offering, how it fits in with our post-secondary educational attainment goals, and looking at it kind of far more holistically. And so that makes sense for it to go to JEC, which it has to some extent in the past. I think, and I agree that we should keep the select committee going, because I think that both of those issues need to be further addressed. That we do have a statewide system of post-secondary education, and we are not coordinating it well enough, and we're not funding it in a meaningful way. But those two go together. And so I don't think that we can simply say that this is a money issue and it goes to JAC, because it really is an educational issue. And so it should go to JEC as well.
Thank you. Let's go back to the person who opened up this discussion as our speaker, and it's kind of his home area. Some direction from you, Mr. Speaker, as we kind of wrap things up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the home area issue is off the table, i.e. the Gillette College bill. That's off the table. We're really now talking about is a continuation of the Select Committee on Community College funding. And I agree with most everything that was said. I think that there is both an educational component and there is a funding component that the state has an interest in. I think there is, if folks are uncomfortable with another select committee, management council creation, and want to go to a task force type approach. I mean, we've done that with other things. We've started at one, gone to the next step, and then gone to a select committee. And statutorily, blockchain, I think, comes to mind in that. So we've had this progression before of different, the biggest thing is just keep having the discussion. The short-term discussion is can there be something ready for this upcoming 2021 general session that is a product of a select committee, of this select committee, because we're not going to have any task force, statutorily devised task force before the end of the before the end of the general session. So between now and the end of the general session, what do we want to try to accomplish? Do we want to give this select committee, management council select committee, authority to keep moving, membership and authority to keep moving and doing their work? It seems like that's the question before us right now. At a subsequent meeting, we can talk about whether, I guess we can decide if we want to build to continue it after this general session. So there's two questions. What do we want to do now in the general session? And then what do we want to do afterwards? At least that's my view. And I don't have the answer for that. I've heard several options and I think they're all valid.
Options. Director Albrecht, do we make this a formal motion to keep the committee, or do we just take a straw poll?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you need to make a formal motion to recreate the committee.
Excellent.
One legislature can't bind a future legislature, so that action of the 65th legislature to create this select committee was a one-year proposition with I think the intent to create it for more than 1 year, but that just needs to be done through a motion today.
Mr. Chairman.
And then Senator Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd beg the indulgence of those that have been on management council longer than me, but why is this even a management council appointed committee as opposed to a legislative resolution to either create a task force and assign it to a standing committee, or why does it simply not get assigned by leadership, the House Speaker and the Senate President, to ask one of their chairmen to pick it up as a standing committee topic? I'm mystified as to, I really don't know why this process unfolds the way it does, as opposed to in the ordinary course of events, it goes to both bodies for consideration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I know Senator Rothfuss has had his hand up before I did. If you would, I would yield my time to him right now.
Level screen. There you are, Senator Rothfuss, on the other side of the screen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. But I'll make a comment in a moment, but to get to Senator Kinski's question, Management Council has authority to create task forces and select committees if they so choose, if something isn't within the topics of other standing committees haven't been assigned, if it's a special purpose or task. So again, it's something that's been done many times, can be done, or the course suggested, Senator Kinski, that you outlined is, again, a perfectly reasonable course that can take place through legislation or through assignment to select committee or standing committees as well. So there's a lot of discretion there. Select committees created by, or task forces created by Management Council can't sponsor their own legislation, where if we assign it to a select committee or to a permanent, a permanent select committee through legislation or through a standing committee, they'd be able to sponsor their own. So hopefully that addresses, it's really just a matter of discretion. Getting back to the question at hand, though, and the preference, I do think that continuation of the task force, or whatever we created, I think it's a task force, that currently exists, would be beneficial. I think they still have some work ahead, and I certainly support that. But going to the conversation that we've been having about the fact that it's broader than just funding, and that there's a lot of educational mission components, and really the statutes surrounding community college districts are a disaster. If you go into them, they're not very good. There's a lot of problems. It might be good then, as we reappoint, to reappoint a couple of members that are on the education committee, so that we've got JAC and JEC coming together as this task force to try and look at both the educational purpose side and maybe the administration side, and then also look at the funding side at the same time to bring back recommendations. So if there were a motion, I'd certainly support it to continue that task force and give them the opportunity to finish their work.
Mr. Floor Leader, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, I'd like to help expedite this conversation.
Let's open it up for a motion quickly after Senator Hicks's comments, unless Senator Hicks would like to make that motion.
Yeah, so Mr. Senator Dockstader, I'll make that motion. But before we do that, I do think it comes, I would ask the chairs of the committee. My recollection is well, we've got a rough draft and quite a bit of information there. I think to get to Vice Chairman Barlow's question, I'm not sure that we have anything that's ready to go before the March 1st session. So, but I would defer to the chairs on that. I want to keep the committee going, keep it rolling, but I would defer to the chairs. But it's my recollection that I don't think that we have anything ready for prime time yet. But I would ask that question of the two chairs, Mr. Chairman.
Co-chairs? Which one?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I don't see Representative Nicholas anymore. At this time, we have another bill, and I'm not sure it's ready for prime time, but essentially the gist of it was that we would have a 1 mil levy on service areas throughout the state. That has not passed the committee. It has not been debated by the committee, but the thought behind it was, if we're going to try and make the community college funding balance, either we have to do two things. We have to ask for a mill levy on the 14 or 15 counties that receive services, or we have to look at different ways to make it balance, which would be to cut or to consolidate community colleges. And so, like I said in my last, we're getting to the point where really tough decisions are going to have to be made. And that's kind of where it's at this point in time. And we really don't have a bill that's ready to go. But if we continue for 2 more years, tough choices are going to have to be made.
There'll be a lot of tough choices this year. Let's do this. Senator Hicks, would you like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I was waiting for Co-Chair Nicholas if he wanted to weigh in on that, whether we have something ready for that we could get keyed up before the March 1st session.
Mr. Chair.
Proceed.
So the answer is, if we had, as Representative Greer talked about, there's about 5 or 6 different components to the current bill. It's all put into one bill. As that one bill is not ready for prime time, and there are lots of components to it. It would be relatively easy to take out 1 or 2 of those components, and with 1 or 2 meetings between now and the end of session, we could have bills ready that come to the floor. I don't know that would be the best way to do it, but I think it's more important that if we sustain this committee and continue it on, we'll probably meet 1 more time. We'll bring the new members up to speed, and then we'll come back to Management Council during or at the end of session and have an outline of exactly what has to do and where we're going to go for the next interim. And it's a fairly comprehensive list. Representative Greer led a community college select committee back in 2016, and it just took an amazing amount of time and effort. It actually accomplished something that this is kind of dovetailing off of. But I would suggest for us to do a really good job and fulfill the mission you've given us, we've got a lot of work and a lot of public meetings to go in order to come forward with it.
Well, you've heard that. Senator Hicks or anyone who would like to proceed with a motion.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would move that the Management Council sponsors a bill to establish the community college funding, or if we want to broaden that, but the community college funding select committee or task force to proceed for the next 2 years and report to the Joint Appropriations Committee.
Second, Representative Summers seconds. Now we can open for discussion. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, just a question to the bringer of the motion. Management Council doesn't need to bring a bill to create this committee. So my question back to the bringer of this motion: do we really want to create a bill, or do we just want to create the task force or the select committee, however you described it in your motion? Because we don't have to bring a bill to do that. If we all agree to that, that's what happens. So my question back to the bringer of this motion: did you really mean a bill or just creation by Management Council?
Mr. Chairman.
Discussion, Senator Hicks.
It was to bring a bill. I believe this is an important enough issue that it ought to go between, for several reasons. Number one, I think it's an opportunity to educate our membership in the legislature, to do it through a bill format. We'll have these discussions as we go through, and I think it affords itself potentially more opportunity for participation by the entire legislature to make this decision. But again, as I presented in the motion, it would be that Management Council would support or sponsor a bill to this effect.
And Representative Summers, I'm assuming you were a second plus a discussion, correct? All right, so you've heard it. Any further discussion? Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a question. So if we do this as a bill, this select committee cannot meet until after that bill is passed. And I thought I understood Chairman Nicholas to say they were interested in meeting again prior to the session in March. So I would just like clarification on that.
Still in discussion. Go ahead, Senator Hicks, and Representative Nicholas, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, go back to what Director Obrecht said is this would pick up where the current management council authorized committee takes off. And so it doesn't preclude somebody following up with an additional motion to say to go ahead and reappoint those vacant positions and authorize, and I mean, management council can do that as a separate action. What I'm saying is if we're going to move this forward and we're looking for another year or two, I would prefer that we sponsor a bill to do that. That would come into effect after the session. But clearly, this group could go ahead and authorize the work to continue. But Mr. Chairman, I did not want to do that as a single motion. I think those should be bifurcated and we vote on them separately.
Okay. For the benefit of those ready to vote, would you repeat it one more time?
I would ask staff to repeat what they think I said.
Who's out there that wants to help us? Staff?
I'll take a stab at it, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Director Obrecht.
I think the motion was to create a select committee. That's what you've got currently, a select committee, which is just members of the legislature, task forces, legislators, and non-legislators. So you've got a select committee of 10 members charged with reviewing funding for the community colleges throughout the state and bringing those bills forward. What you could do in the motion is something to consider is whether right now, and as I understood the motion, Senator Hicks stated that they would report to Appropriations Committee. I think that's completely fine. You also have the option, if you're going to create them in the law, to give them the authority to sponsor their own legislation as well, which you don't have if it's a management council created select committee.
Okay, you've heard a recap. Any further discussion? I'll call for the vote then.
Now, Mr. Chairman, you've got a couple of questions out there.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to see everybody who raised their hand.
Representative Yen.
Gray, I see you. Representative Gray, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to clarify here, for sake of process, this is a bill draft motion, right? So we'd have to still have another meeting to, to officially sponsor, correct?
Is my understanding correct? Do we have somebody else with a hand up?
Representative Yen.
Representative Yen, go ahead. Give me a big double screen here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think I'm going to vote no on this motion. I don't think it's appropriate for us to put in legislation every time we only want a committee for the length of a single legislative session. And I also don't agree that we should put this under the purview of JDC, which already has too much on their plate. So I will be voting no. Thanks.
Further discussion? Further discussion? All those in favor of Senator Hicks' motion, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I got 5. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion fails. Any other motions for consideration? Which one was up first, Rothfuss or Summers? Senator Rothfuss, floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would move for the continuation of the existing task force and further move that the presiding officers appoint interim or fill-in members for those that are no longer in the legislature to allow the task force to continue their work for the upcoming session.
Is there a second? We got a second from Representative Summers. Further discussion? Further discussion? You've heard, oh, go ahead, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick question. Senator Rothfuss, do you meant the leaders of the Management Council and the commission as currently constituted? Or, I'm sorry, just clarify.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I meant continue as it currently exists and then make appropriate appointments to fill in the gaps, basically. So any openings would be filled as appropriate.
All right.
By our presiding officers. And if I did not know there were vacancies on the other side, if that is the case, then those vacancies would be filled appropriately by executive branch.
As follow up to that, the co-chair, Nicholas.
Yeah, it's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, that the Speaker of the House appointed the members of the House side and the President of the Senate appointed the members of the Senate side. So if you follow the original practice, that would be the practice to fill those 2 positions in the House, 2 positions in the Senate.
Representative Gray, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to quickly clarify my position on this. I think that this topic should be moved to the relevant standing committee, which I think is both education and appropriations. And I think they can work together on this. And so I just wanted to clarify what my position is on this whole topic. So I'm going to be voting no on this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Quick follow-up to that, Mr.
Go ahead.
President. Thanks. Mr. President, I absolutely agree with Representative Gray, but we don't have that right now, and we don't have any more work opportunity for our standing committees. My inclination would actually be to ask in the next interim for exactly that to happen, to get some work done by JAC and JEC together to do the right work. So I agree with Representative Gray, but we are where we are. It sounds like the folks have already done some good work, and I want to make sure that they're able to follow through if they have that capacity ahead of the session, which the standing committees can't do. So in the long run, I agree with Representative Gray, but in the short term, I think this motion is in order to just make sure that our good members can follow through and get some work done.
Thank you. I just speaking for a moment myself, have reservations, but at the same time, I would probably say the bodies on both sides of the building have yet to fully understand all that's going on with this proposed legislation. All right, you've heard the motion. We do have a second. All those in favor say aye with your hand. Looks like we got 6. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. Help me out here.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think you can see Representative Yen on your screen, and he voted aye.
What's our vote count? I can't see them both.
I have 6-6.
6 dies for aye.
I'm sorry, it was 7-6 was the vote, I think, with Representative Yen voting aye. If you
Okay.
better, why don't you ask for a roll call, Mr. Chairman?
Say aye. Help me count here.
Well, Heather, Mr. Chairman, Heather will take a roll call vote for
There we
us.
go. Heather, proceed.
Senator Driscoll,
No.
Senator Grew,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
No.
Senator Kinski,
No.
Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Representative Connolly,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
No.
Representative Greer,
No.
Representative Schwartz,
Aye.
Representative Summers,
Aye.
Representative Yen,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Barlow,
Aye.
Chairman Dockstader.
No.
7 ayes, 6 noes.
Passed. Squeak by. So we have those marching orders. All right. Anything else regards to that? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, the motion was for the chairman or the presiding officer on both sides to replace members that may have fallen off the committee. And then was there a term for this committee to actually serve for? Was that part of the motion? I just want to be clear about what I'm going to, if we're going to be appointing new members, I want to be clear about how long their appointments are for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And just, Matt, before you maybe address that, we have 2 missing from the House, none from the Senate. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking right now. We've got 2 from each side missing.
Okay, so we'd have to make minutes.
And Mr. Chairman, I understood the motion that this select committee was just reformed until the start of the March 1st session, and then Management Council would take that issue up again if it needed to be in April. I could be wrong about that. And I also understand, Mr. Chairman, that this select committee, under the motion of Senator Rothfuss, still reports its bills to Management Council?
Correct. My understanding, Mr. Vice Chair, any follow-up? Okay.
Mr. President, this is Chris. Just to clarify, yes, I mean, everything was just a continuation through the session. So continuing their work and allowing them the opportunity to finish up. We can revisit after session effectively what we want to do. And again, I'd probably end up supporting what Representative Gray laid out.
Okay. And we do have some appointments to be made. All right. Anything else on this? Not. Let's go to reviser's bill.
Mr. Chairman, this is the annual bill to clean up errors in legislation, obsolete bills that are past their effective dates. And David Hopkinson, LSO staff attorney, will walk us through this one.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking, I'll kind of just go through the bill page by page here. Starting on page 2, and I'm looking at 21 LSO 456, formal draft 1.0. On page 2, it would amend, looking at line 11, we would amend Wyoming Statute 91701. It would amend it to include this act means Wyoming Statute 91701 through 91711. This is simply a change that appears to have been an oversight when 710 and 711 were added. So this would just be correcting that to include those 2 sections within the act. On further down on line 18 and 19, these changes are correcting statutory citations that were renumbered. So it's simply correcting those citations to the correct ones. On and that's for both 923-006, and then on page 3, it's the same thing in 923-107 on line 8 of page 3. That again is just a citation from a renumbered statute being corrected. At the bottom of page 3 and extending through page 6, the changes that you'll see there are simply adding the dollar symbol to make it consistent. Some of those sections or subsections had the dollar symbol, some did not. So this is just making that consistent across the board by adding that dollar symbol. On page 7, it's amending on line 13. It's amending the citation there to subsection K from subsection H. And again, that's just a statutory correction that it's making there. On pages 7 through 14, amending 23-101, again, just adding the dollar symbol. On pages 14 and 15, amending 23-201, again, adding the dollar symbol there. On page 15, amending 25-10 102. And this change is simply to correct it to the agency that actually provides those rules and regulations. That's my understanding. The state hospital does not generate its own rules and regulations. Those are created by the Department of Health. And so that's the reason for that change there on lines 12 and 13 of page 15. And again, on page 15, line 21, a similar reason for that change there from the state hospital to the department. On page 16, lines 17 and 18, this is just a correction, changing guarantee, the spelling of guarantee. There was an oversight on our part here, and so if anyone on the council would like to make a motion on this, it should be the Wyoming Life and Health Insurance Guarantee Association. So we just need to change on line 17 after health, add the word insurance. That should be there as well. And that would just make it consistent with the, the name of that association. On page 17, lines 2 and 3, that's simply reordering the numbering to make it more consistent with LSO drafting conventions, putting the earlier statutory citation sooner, but otherwise that remains the same. And then on line 7, that's another statutory correction as it exists, or excuse me, that should not be referring to A8, it should be to the A13, which provides the definition of warehousing. Page 17, the changes made to 35106 is simply candling out and making it consistent with LSO drafting conventions, and that continues through page 18. At the bottom of page 18 and through page 25, again, it's just adding the dollar symbol to those references. On page 26, the change there that is actually made at the top of page 26, adding the word laboratory to director. That's to make it consistent with how that term is used in that section and the defined term laboratory director. On page 26, line 16, that is just making a grammatical amendment there, changing have to have. On page 27, lines 10, well, amending line 8, again, is just a grammatical correction, and on lines 10 and 11, amending a statutory reference. The current reference statute doesn't actually exist, and so it's correcting that one to the correct statute. On page 27 and 28, at the top of page 28, it's removing the word special there, and that's to make it consistent with existing statutes referring to senior healthcare districts rather than senior healthcare special districts. And on page 28, amending 3718-102, that change is simply seen there on lines 9, 10, and 11. That's made for clarity and to remove unnecessary or inapplicable language. There were no legislative declarations or findings in statute or the bill draft there. And then in the repealers section at the bottom of page 28, Wyoming statute 2643-207, that's a sunset provision for the healthcare reform demonstration project. which repeals 2643-201 through 2643-206 as of December 31st, 2015. Those statutes have already been repealed. The only thing that remains is that sunset provision, and so this is just repealing that. And then Wyoming Statute 351901 and 351903. That's repealing, well, that Article 9 is the medical malpractice insurance assistance account, which provided loans to pay the cost of a physician's participation in a risk retention group. The original loan application was required to be made by March 30th, 2007, with a 10-year repayment plan. I confirmed with the Department of Health that that program is now defunct, and Section 902 was previously repealed in 2016, and so this will just be repealing a defunct program. With that, have an effective date of July 1st, 2021, and I would stand for any questions.
Questions, committee? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've always had this question. It's just like the perfect time to ask it. What is the procedure with which the LSO drafts the reviser's bill? Do you guys just keep a list of the standing committees finding different, or drafters in each standing committee finding errors, or does the management council or the LSO director, Mr. Obrecht, ask a drafter to audit a certain section of statute? I'm just curious on how it goes.
Background here, Mr. Hopkinson or Mr. Obrecht?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that. Representative Gray, right now what it is just catch as catch can. It's, if anyone notices an error, they report it to us. A lot of time it's from our publisher, from Lexis. They'll notice something, a standing committee will. In the past, and it's been years, but we've actually assigned rewrites of statute of whole titles to different committees, and we've gone through that way to find obsolete or errors in the statute, but we haven't had the resources to do that actually since I've been here 15 years.
Further questions on the reviser's bill? Representative Gray, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. President. One more question. Do we have a list of, like, you know, I hear about before the creation of LSO, a lot of the statutes were created by associations or lobbyists, you know, which ones have gone through a rewrite for standardization? Has that ever been compiled by LSO? Thank you.
Director Obrecht.
Yeah, you bet, Mr. Chairman. We can find out what statutes or what titles have gone through complete revisions.
Thank you.
I think the last one was Title 21 in insurance, and then we also did Title 39 as well. And you can tell 39 with the sales tax and use tax mirroring each other, and 39, 15, and 16. That was part of the big thing on the rewrite of that statute or that title.
Thank you. Further follow-up? Further follow-up? Any public comment, just to make sure? All right, I would entertain a motion.
Vice Chairman has a question.
Oh, okay.
No, move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good. Second, we got Albert, Representative Summers. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember that Mr. Hopkinson mentioned that it would be under their advice to move an amendment on page 16 after the word health on line 17 to add insurance. If that's correct, I'll make that motion to amend.
Motion, got a second from the floor leader. Okay. Moved and seconded. We're back on the bill. All those in favor of the bill, raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, this would be the amendment that we're voting on.
Apologize. Those in favor of the amendment, thank you. Those opposed. All right, now we're back on the bill.
And Mr. President, it'd be roll call.
Okay, take the roll.
Senator Driscoll,
Aye.
Senator Grew,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Aye.
Senator Kinski,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Representative Connolly,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
Aye.
Representative Greer,
Aye.
Representative Schwartz,
Aye.
Representative Summers,
Aye.
Representative Yin,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Barlow,
Aye.
and Chairman Dockstader.
Aye.
13 ayes.
Thank you, Heather.
Mhm.
All right. Let's move on. Assignment of certain topics. Director Albrecht.
Mr. Chairman, we put this on the agenda. If there were any topics that Management Council would like to get a head start on with our delayed start to the session this year, if there's anything in the 21 interim that council would like to assign to interim committees to get the jump on before we meet again in April to assign our full plate. I know that past Speaker and Senate President Eli Bebout was going to address you on this issue. I don't see him right now in the waiting room. Anthony, is Senator Bebout, did he leave the waiting room?
Yeah, he did, Matt. He was on earlier, has left. I did send him a message and let him know where we were at. So I will let him in if he shows up.
All right.
Okay. So then maybe, Mr. Chairman, Management Council would want to consider possible assignment of legislative redistricting.
Okay. Now, you've put together some guidelines prior to hearing from other proposals. You put together some guidelines on those. Would you like to review those?
I would, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I sent the committee earlier, and we have posted on our website the guidelines that the last two management councils during the redistricting process adopted to help with the management of the redistricting process. The overarching goals of these proposed redistricting principles are to develop a library of alternative redistricting plans and to ensure that the public and election officials will have ample opportunity to review and comment upon the library of redistricting plans. The point here, Mr. Chairman, is also management of staff resources, that whoever you give the redistricting assignment to, the chairman of that committee are ultimately responsible for making sure that the redistricting staff is able to do their jobs, able to develop the plans, takes direction only from legislators, and then only after approval of the committee chairman. It also talks about how plans will be displayed on the website, what we'll provide for the public. And Mr. Chairman, I can tell you from experience, 10 years ago, I staffed the redistricting effort. Then from the legal side, it went incredibly smoothly. The chairman of that committee took a lot of public outreach. They set clear ground rules at the beginning of the meeting. We got a lot of public input, a lot of collaboration between legislators and different stakeholders within various areas of the state. So I think these guidelines worked well. And if council was going to assign this topic today to a committee, I would ask, like we did in 2011, to incorporate this within the interim topic that is assigned.
Director, so we just proceed and assign it to corporations. Is that what you're saying with these ground rules?
Mr. Chairman, you can assign it to whoever you want with these ground rules. The last two redistricting cycles, it was assigned to the joint corporations, elections, and political subdivisions interim committee. There was discussions for sure 10 years ago, and I believe 20 years ago, about creation of a select committee as well to do that. Ultimately, those two redistrictings, the joint corporations committee was assigned. So it's up to management council who you want to assign that to.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you. Again, And again, as a newbie, I have a question. I'd like to understand the whys and the wherefores. My understanding in the Senate is this topic's already been assigned to a committee. I understand statutorily that that the Management Council has the responsibility to oversee, quote, studies, unquote. That is to make sure that the various standing committees don't command too much resource from LSO and overload it. So I can see that we have a role in monitoring the resources that are pulled for redistricting. But how does it fall to us to decide that we're going to assign this as a topic to any particular committee when I think in the Senate, our president has already done that? How does that fall to Management Council? Somebody can explain that to me. I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is the background on that? Director?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, I'm certainly not aware of this topic being assigned to anyone yet. In all the past redistricting meetings I'm aware of, it was done through the interim committee process where Management Council decided what interim committee would stand that. I think it would be hard for one body just to decide who would study this during the interim, since your standing committees don't actually exist during the interim. It would only be an interim committee or a select committee that would take that up. So that's why I think council is considering this today.
Okay, now we do have one proposal out there. Senator Rothfuss will give you a chance to speak. Senator Bebout, give us a little bit of time here to get this sorted out. Vice Chairman Barlow. Mute.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ensure you saw that Senator Bebout had joined us. Good to see you, Senator.
Well, if there's no objection, we could take a break and let Senator Bebout speak. He's got all dressed up like he's back in the Senate and ready to go. All right, so go. Senator Bebout, Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, all in one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. It's great to call you Mr. President, members of Management Council. I'm going to try to be very short and brief, and I'm here today as Eli Bebout, a citizen of Wyoming from Riverton, Wyoming, and I do apologize. Initially, it showed me as senator in 26, and that's a great thing to have had, and I'm moving on. But what I wanted to talk to you about, Mr. Chairman, is I think an issue that's very important. I wouldn't take your valuable time to discuss it if I didn't think it was, and it deals, of course, with coal, and we all understand coal and the impact it's had on our state through the production of coal, but also the impact of the potential closing of our power plants in Wyoming. And Mr. Speaker, up in your area, it's huge. Mr. President, in your area, it's huge. It's huge for the state of Wyoming. And as we all know, we've made some real progress in the past several sessions. In 2019, Senator then Dockstader, Mr. President, sponsored House Bill or Senate File 159. And that, of course, set up a mechanism so a coal-fired power plant could be purchased by somebody else, and the legislation was there to allow that. And then in 2020, the budget session, House Bill 200 was sponsored by a House member, and that, of course, got into the PSC. And Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, the reason I come to you today is I sense the urgency of the Management Council and the full legislature considering what we might do as we move forward in this area of trying to keep our coal-fired power plants moving and creating electricity, keeping the jobs, generating the revenues, all of the things that we all know about. And the one thing that comes to my mind, Mr. Chairman, is CCUS, carbon capture underground storage. And it's actually as part of the House Bill 200 that we talked about in terms of giving the PSC some latitude for some work on some amendments to what they may or may not do with a huge regional provider of electricity in our state. And so what I would like to talk to you about very briefly, Mr. Chairman, is to look forward to how the legislature, and if you decided to do it interim because of the urgency, I think that would be a good idea. But certainly at some point in time, legislation to bring forward and continue the movement of this very, very important issue for the state of Wyoming. And some would ask, well, why do we want to work on coal when we have a new administration coming in that wants to be fossil fuel free by 2035, and we all know that's only 14 short years away. My response to that, Mr. Chairman, would be that now is the opportunity, because also under the present administration, they'll be taking oath of office here in a couple of days. They are very, very strong supporters of CCUS. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that there's $40 billion set aside to get involved in that. And once again, if Wyoming would be on the forefront in how we move forward and do things, which is what we've done so many times in the past, we could have a real opportunity to go into some of these coal-fired power plants in Wyoming, add the CCUS technology. And there is technology out there, Mr. Chairman, that works. Some of it is rather more expensive than others. We may continue to develop. You know, we're not locked in any technology, but at least to get the process started and allow us to move forward. And there may be some tweaking we need to do the PSC rules and regulations in our statutes. It'd be great to hear from the experts out there that understand this issue and their recommendations, how we move forward. I think it would be a win-win for the state of Wyoming to move this agenda. If you were going to do it for an interim work, Mr. Chairman, corporations, I just see where you're going to put the redistrict on them. That's a heavy lift, but this is also very important. Or, you know, however you want to do it. I just wanted as a citizen to share with you over all the years of experience I've had dealing with minerals issues, Wyoming, our state, the government, the federal issues. This is just a thing we should really move forward on. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll get off. There's other things I could be saying. I had a list of reasons why it makes sense to do it. Part of that would be, you know, to look at some of the other opportunities. If we were able to keep these power plants open, we could also expand the other side of that and the electricity side, where we could sell electricity to ongoing situations in Wyoming. Maybe it's data centers. Obviously, we have the use for tertiary recovery with CO2 injection into a lot of older oil fields. So there's a lot of reasons why it makes a lot of sense. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for listening. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. You know, ultimately, our work would come back through Chairman Greer's committee in some form or fashion. Could our chairman weigh in on where we would take this and what his opinion would be?
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and President Bebow. Thanks for bringing forth a very important issue. And we are making progress here. And so a couple of things, again, as we transition a little bit, transition a little bit's a tough word. The DOE funds are still there. The DOE funds have been reauthorized in the last appropriations bill. The work that the legislature's done, going back to your time on minerals and your work on the Energy Resource Council, is moving forward and moving forward at a good pace. As we are right now, I just got notice yesterday that with the money we set aside for the flameless pressurized oxygen study, or prototype, and it's to a larger scale, was not seated in Laramie because of, and with the University of Wyoming for several different reasons, but rather was relocated in cooperation with Black Hills Energy to Gillette, where they're very excited, and that grant was just awarded. The work that's been done out of the School of Energy Resources with respect to the carbon safe, so we're now been awarded the grant for phase 3 of that, which will then step into, we're moving one step closer. So phase 3 skins us down, and Senator Rothfuss might know this number a little better than I, but somewhere we were down to 7. Now we're looking at 3, and basically why it's Wyoming in competition with North Dakota. In North Dakota, in order to save their limited coal industry, several years ago went ahead and set aside a special fund, and it was as part of their tax on their own industry, set that aside so that they had the funds there for this matching grant and the resources behind all the administration and to be able to work to stand this stuff up. What Wyoming's been doing is working with the School of Energy Resources, letting them take the front load. And then, as you know, we've taken the Wyoming Energy Authority is now coming on board, get their legs underneath of them so we can have that transition. With that also comes hopefully the use, if we can ever get these sorted out properly, but the use of those of the bonding authority that's available. So very important. Last year, we looked at where were we at, appropriations members, 18 million, plus we brought in another 3 million that were reserved for these types of projects. And we fought hard. I did a lot of fighting behind the scenes with the help of the appropriations committee members to keep those funds in place, and they're being matched 45 to 1, 12 to 1 with the Department of Energy. It isn't just about dollars. It's about the fact of putting Wyoming in a position to be a technology leader and an innovator in this area to pay off for us. But you're right, we can't quit. We cannot afford to not continue to invest down this path. And we cannot afford not to continue to look at what we can do in our regulatory environment. And then this crosses over into something I know very little about. And that's with the PSC, how we deal with that leg of it. And so your Minerals Committee will have these as important topics. We'll continue to push those forward. We'll have these discussions as we get into the budget of what we have to do, what we might be able to do to continue these projects. And I'm going to lean on Senator Rothfuss here just a little bit, but we've had some discussions where 2 years ago we were working on the issues with APDs and the help with oil drilling took up a lot of our time. And we found ourselves sort of in this no man's land. Does this belong in minerals or does this belong in corporations? Okay. And we kind of batted it back and forth. And I think Senator Rothfuss and I and a couple other members of the Minerals Committee have said, you know what, we need to go ahead and just grab that and pull those issues into minerals this interim and work those. So that just a quick overview, President Bebout.
Thank you, Chairman Greer. Senator Bebout, would you like to follow up on that, or do we have members of the committee who would like to follow up on that? Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman of Minerals. Mike, appreciate those comments and the good work you're doing. And the thing that what comes back to, I think, in play is the urgency of the situation and how we would need to move forward, and particularly with the PSC, you know, and we all understand the large provider of utilities in our state has gone with an IRP that there's a lot of questions asked by many of us in the legislature. And I think the just recently retired chairman of the PSC did yeoman's work in coming up with ideas on that IRP and finding what I consider to be faults in it. I think there's a lot of questions concerning their rationale between how they can replace those coal-fired power plants and how it saves $500 million. I would argue that it might cost $500 million. So there's a lot of work that the PSC needs to be doing with that IRP and with that large utility. So this just dovetails into that. And Mr. Chairman, as we all know, it's kind of like first come, first serve. And so Chairman Greer, you said it very well. You know, it's out there. We got to be moving as quickly as we can and legislatively as we can to take advantage of those things that are presented to us. North Dakota, they're really aggressive in this, and I understand that, but so can Wyoming be, and there's probably plenty for both. And what they have up there, their large power plant is a lignite plant up there, and it's a lot different than our thermal coal. So there's advantages we have that they don't have. So the timing is really right, Mr. Chairman. How you proceed certainly is up to you, Management Council and Legislature, but I sure hate to look down 2 years down the road and say that woulda, shoulda, coulda to what we might be able to do now. Thank you.
Chairman Greer, would you think there would be room for putting something together specifically addressing carbon capture underground storage? Can we take that one step further, acknowledging that there's a change in the administration?
So, Mr. Chairman, the answer to your question is yes. I think what we have to do and what we've been working on, it's all a process, is to try to bring our stakeholders together in Wyoming. In my opinion, we were a bit siloed. The Wyoming Energy Authority is breaking those silos down and moving these in the right direction. We're getting more information across the areas and the expertise that we need. We're starting to find where we're getting a little more mass behind the request for these grants, and that instead of competing individuals or individual groups competing for these grants in Wyoming, we're competing together as one, and it's a powerful voice because that's exactly right. Wyoming, and you look at, and just take the Dry Fork Station in particular in that area, it has it all for this. If we're going to do carbon capture and sequestration, which has to be a component of it when you look under the terms of the carbon safe, and then move into enhanced oil recovery with it, it's it is the place. It's the mecca for it. And we're getting set up with it. We've done a lot to get there, but it's been a frustratingly slow pace. But my feeling is that it has quickened substantially in the last 18 months. And we just can't quit now. We need to keep pushing and moving forward with it.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, let me ask this first. Would you see this as bringing together a group of people with specific legislation going through the Minerals Committee to get this done, with the idea that we meet up with the requirements of a brand new administration right out of the gate? How do we put this together? How do we make this happen? How do we expedite it?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think as we talk through, this is a strange world right now, but if we were all down in Cheyenne and talking and meeting with stakeholders and just talking as legislators, we'd be kicking around, okay, how do we shape our interim topics? How do we focus on the particular issues that we need to? And one of the questions, and I've been kicking this around, and I really have not spoken with any of the members of JAC yet about this, but what do we need to have in reserve for matching funds? And again, I know this all sounds terrible, but that's the simple fact is you get the matching funds that are there to tie in with the Department of Energy funds, which are available. What that does is that pushes Wyoming forward as a leader in that area. And then once you can establish yourself as a leader in technology and desire and a resource, then the rest will follow. And so we're positioned where we need to be, maybe only a year behind North Dakota, but we are in darn good shape to overtake them. And so I guess to answer your question directly is we need to just be having those discussions right now when we get together. And then when we roll out is to make sure that the mission, the request for the Minerals Committee cover the proper topic areas, that we've got that narrowed down, and then that we go and do the work that is assigned to us, which I take pride on our committee doing. The missing ingredient that I don't have anything I want to roll out right now, but which I want to be able to work a little bit more is, what do we set aside so we do have the funds to continue to push the initiative.
We prep it for the interim then.
Yes.
Okay. Representative Gray, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask Senator Bebout what his opinion is on the PSC in terms of pushing back on the IRP, the assumptions in there. You alluded to that earlier. Do you think, in your opinion, they're doing enough? If you want to weigh in on that, and anyway, in terms of the oversight function that the legislature has, that we can encourage that through legislation or just through overall oversight. Thank you.
Eli.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray, thanks for that question. What I would say is that I think in the past, and I go back like 5 or 10 years, that maybe the PSC was not in tune to some of these issues, but it came to the forefront with the IRP. And of course, the legislature made it very clear to that large utility in our state that we were very upset with their assumptions. And when a lot of us analyzed that, and I'm no expert by far, but when you look at it and their assumptions to show where they would have that $500 million of savings just didn't make any sense to me and a lot of members, including the former speaker, former President Perkins. A lot of us have met with that large utility, members on this committee as well. And Senator Dockstader was involved in that too. So what I think happened is they got a message from the legislature, and like I said earlier, they took it to task, and they really did some good work in the last year and a half to do some things that I said that I think put that large utility back on track. However, as I look at that and I look at the statutes, I think there are things we need to do with the PSC when we hear testimony from other people to give them more authority and able to do their job, to give what we all want, is we want a responsible IRP that takes care of Wyoming and Wyoming customers. And we're not going to jeopardize what we pay for electricity or what goes on in our state just so other states can get what they want. And I heard yesterday a large state out west on the northern part of the north of California, I think you know what I'm talking about. I think their PSC has said, well, we're not going to pay for any of the decommissioning costs in a state like Wyoming. Well, that's crazy. why should we have to do it when they've had the benefits of it all along from us? So that's the kind of fight we're fighting. So yes, the PSC has made progress. And yes, we probably need to have a good discussion like Mr. Chairman Greer talks about to see where we can help the PSC to move our agenda forward, not the agenda of other states.
We'll put that together for interim follow-up, Mr. Gray, Representative Gray. Okay. Anyone else for, I think we got the direction interim through our good minerals chair. He gave us the direction. Anybody else would like to follow up at this point? Eli.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one last thing that we don't really know about, but something for you all to consider is if we do in fact do this and we do prevent coal-fired power plants from shutting down and we come up with a carbon capture, the state will receive and have the benefits of new revenues. And there's a lot of ways that might happen. So just keep that in the back of your mind. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. I appreciate it. Good luck. You got a lot of work ahead of you and I'll be there supporting you.
Senator Bebout, thank you. We look forward to working with you on this topic. Thank you. All right, we'll go. Thank you again. Let's go back to our discussion on redistricting. Matt, you laid out that we do have the guidelines in place to do this as a committee. Further discussion on this as a joint committee, I should say. Further discussion? Senator Rothfuss, you had something? Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. President. Yeah, Mr. President, I circulated a motion which would, instead of having it end up as an interim topic for the Corporations Committee, would provide an opportunity to have a select committee. And again, it's a policy decision. I think there's advantages to each of them, but I think the advantages to the select committee approach, at least in my view, outweigh the advantages to the standing committee. So everyone should have a copy of the motion, and I'd be happy to read through the motion, but I think everybody has it there and I can highlight some of the key points. The language and the purpose are actually to a large degree cut and pasted from the material that Director Obrecht circulated. So effectively, it would be doing the same thing with the same mission as our previous committees on legislative redistricting with similar approaches and timelines. And again, that material is certainly up for discussion in the same way it would be in the other circumstances, as far as outlining the responsibilities, where those responsibilities, obviously including managing the task and making sure there's sufficient public input, developing an appropriate database, guiding principles, and then drafting legislation for the 2022 legislative session, which would be the case whether it's standing committee or whether it's a select committee, and then travel throughout the state and make sure to hold a large number of meetings to guarantee public input to the greatest degree possible. But the difference here certainly would primarily just be the membership of the select committee. And I draw the management council's attention to the points 1 through 5, which lay out what an alternative approach to select committee membership would look like. Right now, obviously, if it's membership through a standing committee, you have a circumstance where you have 9 members of the House, 5 members of the Senate. In all likelihood, it would go traditional, which is that majority of those members present would pass both motions on amendments and then motions on bill recommendations, unless there was a change to the rules that was made at the beginning, which may or may not be the case. And I think there's some concern there with the disproportionate representation between the two chambers. And I also think that it's very important to ensure that representation that's considering geographic locations, considering demographics, and considering communities of interest is specifically taken into account when assembling this committee in a way that wasn't necessarily the key driving factor for putting together the standing committee. And you can do that if you have more flexibility in assigning. So, Mr. President, the membership of this would be that the chairman of the House Corporations Committee and Senate Corporations Committee would serve as co-chairman of the Select Committee as well. I think that continuity is very important, and I think that's an essential factor, that you'd still have those. But to, again, expand opportunity of involvement, the way the motion is drafted, the majority floor leader in the House and the majority floor leader in the Senate would be members, or their designees would be members of a select committee. Minority floor leader of both chambers or their designee would be members. And then the presiding officers would choose 5 additional members from each the House and the Senate, with consultation given to the House majority and minority leaders. So you'd have a broader representation of 7 members from each chamber, and hopefully good consultation. One problem that I think this addresses, is, as well as the sort of disproportionate representation, is just the challenge of the fact that on the Corporations Committee and the Senate side, there is not a Democratic member, which would lead to only 1 member of the 14 being from the minority party, despite the fact that 25% of the votes in the last election roughly were minority cast statewide. So I think having 2 members would at least provide voices in both sides in the debate, which is important. Then as part of the rest of the motion, there's a budget outlined here of $50,000. That's a bit of a wag based on previous. There was 37.5, I think, 10 years ago. 50 is what's here as a placeholder. I look to Director Obrecht for any suggestions on that. And then one challenge with a select committee as opposed to a standing committee is that the select committee that's formed by the management council would not be able to sponsor its own legislation. So legislation would be potentially brought by the management council or the corporations committee, and that could be amended into the motion as well, which I believe the draft that was circulated has sponsorship by the select committee, but that would need to be amended to be sponsored by management council or the corporations committee, if so desired. And then legislation forwarded by the select committee shall require passage by a majority of members of each chamber voting separately. And Mr. President, I think that's an important feature that we would want in the body that was considering the redistricting plan, because like many of the issues that we work on, we want to make sure that each chamber is supportive of it and each chamber has appropriate and proportional representation in a way that would allow neither chamber to effectively overwhelm the other chamber. So, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to bring this alternative as a point of consideration, as an alternative to having the standing committee of the corporations committee just basically carry on as they did in the past. And I'd open it up for discussion. I can make the motion as well if we'd like at this time, or we can have discussion on it.
Hold
It's
on
up
the
to you.
motion until we have some discussion.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Mr. President.
You researched it well. Before I open it up to further discussion, I have some concerns that it came rather quickly when in the past, and I've lived through redistricting once. If you haven't gone through it, and for those who are just being elected, they're going to get a taste of it. It's very difficult. I spent a lot of time traveling the state, tracking it. But as I recall, we were able to do it well within the confines of joint corporations. We held meetings all across the state. I think I attended meetings in every corner of the state. I attended multiple meetings in the western side of the state as we came down to an agreement on those boundaries. And my concern is that a subcommittee may dilute it down further when we actually have a committee in place to do that. But I'll respect the floor leader's comments and allow you to reach in or raise your hand now and offer your comment as well on this proposal.
Mr. President, I'll respond briefly to that. I don't doubt that the standing committee can do it and has done it in the past. I certainly think that's accurate. But again, there are reasons that I think that this approach through a select committee is advantageous. And realistically, one of those is that the corporations committee often runs 20 bills in a season. They're one of the hardest working and most worked committees I think this would provide an opportunity to have different focuses effectively, where you've got a group that's dedicated to redistricting. The group can be comprised of members that may not be available or have the possibility of availability for the standing committee, including the, as noted, the majority leadership, a majority floor leader in each chamber or their designee would be able to be engaged. Mr. President, if it's standing committees, you would not be able to be a member, but you might be interested in being a member and certainly could appoint yourself. I've had really positive experience with select committees in the past because of the fact that you can target a specific topic, bringing in the most experienced members and those with the most expertise, while simultaneously bringing in the appropriate diversity of views. So I can't imagine there's anything that the standing committee could do, Mr. President, that the select committee honestly couldn't do better, with the exception of drafting its own legislation. But I don't see that as a barrier. I mean, not drafting, excuse me, sponsoring its own legislation, but realistically, we handle that all the time. That's not really a barrier. You just bring it to Management Council or the Corporations Committee for final committee sponsorship. And I don't think that's that far out of order. This is something that I think it's just worthy of debate, certainly, Mr. President. And if there are reasons why the standing committee is a superior vehicle, I'm interested in hearing those. I don't see them, to be perfectly honest with you. I haven't, in all the discussions we've had over the last several months on this topic, I haven't really heard a reason why the standing committees would provide a better venue, would serve the public better, would better represent communities of interest, demographics, or regions relative to select committee. So I'm curious to hear what members might think otherwise. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mute, please.
Question, Mr. Chairman, on that is I'm assuming that when the last two corporations committee did redistricting, that I don't know about superior, but it appears to me that they did an adequate job. It was adopted and moved forward. So, if they can do the job, is it a debate as to having somebody a better committee, or is it we're talking about superior results versus adequate or inadequate results?
Discussion continues, and we'll both offer answers on that. Senator Guru.
That's going to be an occupational hazard for you, Mr. Chairman. But thank you. I'm number 3. I guess we don't have a motion, so not on anything. But I just want to say I think there is, by virtue of having a select committee, there is a virtue, and just to amplify, when you look at the current committee, and it's a great committee, but it doesn't have any representation in my part of the state, in the far western part of the state. There's 2 members from Fremont County, but beyond that, there's none. And so this would give a select committee would give an opportunity, just an opportunity to give the entire state a more even voice, that the leadership, the current leadership, and I want to make sure this is, this is not necessarily, this is not political RD thing for me. It's more regional of an argument. We all know the score as far as the membership of the House and the Senate. So to the victors go the spoils, and that's terrific. But in this way, we would have more of a chance to have a geographic balance that I think would be advantageous, and still have the same leadership of the 2 members of chairs of corporations who have experience in this area, so that we get the benefits of the committee, but then we also have the opportunity to have the benefits of geographical balance. That's why I think that this is a better policy. Plus, then we also have a chance to get more of an equal split between the two bodies. And one point on that is, since it is a nested district plan, that doesn't mean it's us versus the House versus the Senate. It actually works better for both if it works out more evenly. And this also gives you that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further follow-up? Senator Kinski and then Representative Schwartz.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I applaud you, Senator Rothfuss, on the work and the thought that you put into it. And I think it would be appropriate to bring the appointment of a task force or a select committee forward as an individual bill rather than management council moving it forward. I think that goes beyond the scope of what we should be doing on management council. I think I don't, and with all due respect, I don't think I have to argue the proposition as to why a select committee is not going to be as good as a standing committee. I think the standing committees can do an adequate job. But if there's a case to be made that they can't, that should be debated on the floor of both the House and the Senate. And for that reason, if there is a motion, I can't support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion? Oh yeah, Representative Schwartz, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Senator Guru, and where I don't agree with him that our part of the state is not represented on the corporation committees because of Representative Roscoe is clearly from our area. But the geographical distribution on the Joint Corporation Committee is not particularly good. There's 3 members from Cheyenne. There's no members from Campbell Sheridan, no members from Sweetwater Carbon. If you look at it, I don't think it has that geographical representation that we should ideally be looking for, because I think we know how legislators are, and as much as we try and represent the state of Wyoming, we tend to think locally a lot of the time, and that could create problems if corporations is in charge of redistricting. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Senator or Chairman Dockstader, just for clarification, and maybe Senator Rothfuss can go back, but I didn't hear anything in that motion that this committee would have a requirement to have a geographic representation around the state. So I'm curious, are we debating a foregone conclusion here, or did I miss that in part of the motion? Because you could have a select committee that still doesn't have geographic representation. And if that's the desire of the committee, that probably should be, or the bringer of the motion, that probably should be part of the motion.
Senator Guru.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. I was pulling down my screen and I did not see, and I thank Representative Schwartz for correcting me about the good Representative Roscoe, and he does represent as well. And to Senator Hicks, well, all I said was the opportunity to, through picking the committee by the leadership, to get that geographic help that I think the committee needs. Doesn't mean it'll happen. Doesn't mean it'll happen at all, just the opportunity. And I wouldn't want to write it that way. Like I say, I think they have the right to pick who they want to be on there. But I think they'd have the opportunity. Thank you.
Representative Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've lived through this once, and I live in the Bighorn Basin, which presents its own unique set of circumstances because we're surrounded by mountains on all sides with a small canyon to give us an outlet. And it makes it very difficult. And 10 years ago, when we went through this, the basin was affected. There wasn't a member on the Corporations Committee from the basin. And yet the committee came up, met in the basin twice. We worked with other legislators and found a solution that worked very well for the Bighorn Basin. And I felt very comfortable with that process. And I have enough trust in our other legislators, the ones that are sitting on the standing committee now, to do the very same thing again. So the process worked for not just my district, but it was for this whole region that I tried to look out for and felt very, very comfortable with it. And we've got, I just looked at the group that's on that, on both the Senate and the House side of corporations. And it is a very, both presiding officers couldn't have done any better setting up those committees for this task.
Further discussion? I'll just go ahead, Representative Gray, and then I'll add something.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to say I'm opposed to this. I appreciate Senator Rothfuss's enthusiasm, always puts a lot of work into his motions, a lot of thought, but I am opposed to this. Pretty similar reasons as Senator Kinski. First of all, from the process standpoint, I think that this is a bill. It's not a motion for management council. I do think if it were a motion for management council, the fact that this wasn't in the meeting materials, it really wasn't on the agenda until the hour before. I think that amplifies it in terms of, for me, a no on structure, as well as on even if the bill came forward on the substance itself. I do think this is more appropriate in the standing committee. And I think we can talk about workload a little bit in the interim topic discussion on how how corporations' workload is looking, but I think this is appropriate for the standing committee. So I oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just take you back when we did this before. It ended up, standing committee had it, and they went around the state and held all their major meetings. And then somewhere along the way, they sent us out, those to the east, work on that area, those to the west. And I can remember working with representatives, Roscoe, Gingrey, all of those folks. We had multiple meetings with the legislators from the southwestern part of the state. We had meetings in Jackson several times, meetings in Pinedale several times, meetings in Green River Rock Springs, in Evanston. We had multiple meetings all around the region with county commissioners, with the public as a whole. And we were able to iron out where we were going to go without a select committee. It took a lot of time and a lot of work, but it was well worth it. I can remember the two co-chairs. They said, okay, we've got it down to this point. You folks head out and meet in your smaller areas, which we did multiple times. A lot of odometer miles, a lot of work went into that. And we finally reached an agreement. And it wasn't without going to the people in each of these areas and asking for their comment, their input. We laid out the maps, we did all that, and then we brought it back to the committee. In fact, they held an extra committee meeting in January just to go over redistricting. We laid it out there, got approval, and then we moved it onto the House and Senate floors. They put on the big screens and the maps. We got final approval there. And that was all done through the standing committees. A lot of work went into it. And I would just say probably we don't, while I respect the work that's gone into this proposal today, I would say we've got the people in place to handle this now with our standing committees. Anybody else? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, first of all, I mean, there is no motion as this is just an opportunity to discuss, and it seems that the Management Council is interested in sticking with the current process. So I'll certainly respect that. As to the relevance of this process and whether it's appropriate for the Management Council, this is literally what the Management Council does. This is absolutely down the center of the plate to decide whether we want it to be a select committee or a standing committee. And the reason that this topic is on the agenda today is to decide this, whether or not we want to add this to the plate for the Corporations Committee ahead of time, or whether we want to wait until we're doing our assignment of interim topics. So with some of the resistance I heard, my suspicion then is, since we haven't duly noticed this, that we're going to resist assigning it as a topic to the Corporations Committee. And I guess I'd resist that as well. One way or another, we probably want to get started on this. And if it's the will of the Management Council that we assign to the Corporations Committee, I would advise that we assign early, so that they can get started on this and at least start contemplating it, whether it's through a select committee or through the standing committee. Honestly, Mr. President, I didn't hear any arguments against any of the points that I made realistically in terms of why the select committee would do a better job than a standing committee. Just that the standing committee did a fine job in the past, and I agree to that. But the standing committee also brought something back to the legislature that was then a source of an incredible amount of floor debate and time. I was there for the floor debate, although I didn't travel around the state as you did, Mr. President, and go to all the meetings. But it's hard to say that the product that was brought from the standing committee back in the last redistricting was then blessed by all members. In fact, I think it was torn apart, and I think there was even a lawsuit based on some of the changes, and there was a lot of consternation. Based on my recollection of that, it seems to me that it would be more appropriate to put together a committee with a broad representation that we could do with a select committee. To Senator Hicks' point about the language not being there, I actually had the language in an early draft, and when it was reviewed by some members, they were concerned that it was too prescriptive by saying that we had to have a geographic distribution. I like the idea of having the language of a geographic distribution in there, but I tried to just give the flexibility to the presiding officers. So, Mr. Chairman, again, the idea of running it as legislation seems to delay things too much, realistically, when we could certainly get that started now. It's an alternative approach, but I would just reiterate, this is well within the scope of the role the Management Council is supposed to play in trying to determine these types of logistics. So if the Management Council does want this approach, I don't see any problem. We could run legislation, but I would suggest that one way or another we assign today so that the folks that are involved can get started and have the blessing to do so. And with that, Mr. President, I won't make a motion unless another member has for some reason changed their mind, although I don't anticipate that, nor did I anticipate, in fact, any other outcome than what we're seeing. So with that, I'll pause, see if there's anyone that would like to make a motion, and if not, maybe we can get back to the next point in contention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. I don't see anybody stepping forward with a motion. So at this point, we do have the guidelines in place. Director Obrecht has noted that. Mr. Co-Chair, would you have any follow-up?
Mr. Chairman, so I guess if there's, the question I guess before us is, do we want to take some action now and instruct whether it's a select committee or a standing or joint standing committees who will then come together as interim joint committees to start preparatory work on this issue? I think that's what's before us now, to start establishing that. And if we want to put together a formal charge for those committees, because I don't think that what Director Obrecht sent out had some of the formal charge that was done in the last one. I think there's a more formal charge about like 10 points that Management Council put forth the last time. So maybe Director Obrecht, would you speak to that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Obrecht, follow.
You bet. Mr. Chairman, if you look on, it's the memo dated today, January 18th, 2021, that I sent you and is posted online. On page 2, about halfway down is the actual Management Council interim topic to the Joint Corporations Committee from 2011. And that directive worked well. I would note just one point, that there was 2 budgets for the Joint Corporations Committee that year. $37,500, which was their standard budget, and then another $100,000 for redistricting. And that was because of just the incredible amount of meetings that were held around the state for redistricting. It didn't include, that 100,000 did not include what LSO spent on the necessary GIS software. That's a different line item within the feed bill and doesn't need to be. This is just simply for travel expenses for the committee. So, Mr. Chairman, I can walk through that motion. If you want me to.
Would you hit the highlights on it, please?
Yeah. The Corporations Committee in 2011 was tasked with coordinating and managing redistricting of the legislature following the 2010 census. To accomplish the task, the committee managed LSO redistricting staff, provided abundant opportunity for legislator and public input on redistricting, developed a database of proposed alternative redistricting plans, which the public and elected officials had an opportunity to review and comment upon, and they prepared a single redistricting bill for introduction in the 2012 legislative session, which also provided the opportunity for alternative redistricting plans or amendments to that plan to be incorporated with it. It set out a meeting schedule. This will need to modify some based on when we actually get the census numbers. Nobody knows yet. So in 2011, we got them early in the spring. By April, we knew what the census numbers said. We had the census data down to the census block, which is the lowest unit of measurement within the census data. And we could then build some early plans for that committee to help guide the discussions. And what we did was, based on a 30 senator plan with 2 House districts nested within each Senate district, we figured out what the ideal size of those Senate districts were and what those House districts were. And then through the Corporations Committee chairman and through the Corporations Committee, we allocated, based on population, seats within geographic regions of the state. For example, Laramie County could wholly support 5 Senate districts and 10 House districts. The Bighorn Basin could be 2 Senate districts and 4 House districts. And then the committee chairman gave the direction then for folks to go forward, legislators meet from those areas, meet with their stakeholders, and start developing plans to come back to the Corporations Committee to kind of plug in on that broader scale. And the chairman's right, it was hard work, but at the end of the day, that basic structure held throughout the entire redistricting process.
Thank you. Any questions for our director? Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Matt, in one of the letters you sent us from November 2011, in addition to the guidelines you referenced, there were redistricting principles. There were 5 of them. Is that something that's traditionally included in guidance for the committee?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, great point, covered in footnote 2 on my memo. And you got to distinguish between the redistricting guidelines and redistricting principles. Redistricting principles have been adopted by the actual redistricting committee the last 2 times. And what those lay out is adherence to the one-man, one-vote principles, adherence to the other redistricting principles that the Wyoming Supreme Court, the federal district courts for Wyoming, the 10th Circuit, and the U.S. Supreme Court have discussed. You follow geographic and community boundaries as much as possible. You don't split communities of interest as much as possible. If you have the ability for a minority majority district, you should seriously consider the creation of a minority majority district. We always took it further to in areas where we had a recognizable minority population that might not be the majority in the district, we still did substantial outreach to those groups. The district size couldn't deviate past 10% from the ideal. That will be up to the committee to adopt those, the actual redistricting committee.
Follow up for a director or questions or comments in general? Go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. Director Obrecht, I just want to ask you, do you see any downside with us? We did get this the hour before, and I understand it's busy and things, and there's a lot going on, but, going back and maybe meeting at the end of session, and, we're probably not going to get the numbers, like you said, till April anyway. I definitely want to ask Senator Rothfuss too, but do you see any necessity to pass the guidelines today rather than us having an opportunity to go back and just make sure we're covering all the bases? Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I don't know if there's a necessity today, but there certainly was an expressed desire to begin this work. And if we can begin the education component and of that with a meeting or two before April, when we get the redistricting actual data later on, we'd be able to hit the ground running. So I think that would be the one plus side of doing it today, but it wouldn't be absolutely detrimental or disastrous if you waited till April to do it either.
Further, Director, I'm thinking if we have this template in place, that at least puts us in the mode to start the work. Am I missing anything there?
No, Mr. Chairman, that template, you would give that to whatever committee you chose to do this. And that committee could hold meetings between now and the beginning of session to begin some of the background work needed for the redistricting process to lay a foundation for when we do get those census numbers.
The numbers back. Would anybody? Oh, Chairman Greer.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important we get this, send a clear message to the Joint Corporations Committee that they're going to be doing this work. Some of the lead up to it's a lot of education. We've got, because of the delay in session, there's time for them to get together, start mulling this over, look at what was done 10 years ago. I think it's very important. My recollection of 10 years ago is it was difficult to get all those meetings in, and there was a tremendous amount of work that went into it. As you'll see, I think it's even listed in some of the materials Matt provided us. There's something like 12 different plans that kind of came in that solidified this. I know within the Bighorn Basin, Lorraine Korberg and I worked on a plan, and I've got all the Bighorn Basin legislators to agree to it, and then we had the clerk sign on to it. You know, it's that type of collaboration that helps us go forward. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd move that Management Council direct that the Joint Corporations Committee begin as soon as practical with interim work to start the education process and to start outlining an overall process of how to tackle this task.
For the motion, there's a second. Vice Chairman Barlow gives us a second. Representative Summers, discussion.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And maybe to the bringer of the motion, do you think this will be the last direction we give that committee, or is this just the beginning? Because I guess I'll just make my point here. I want to make sure that there's ample meetings around the state. I want this body, this would be something that I would certainly bring as an amendment when the time is right. I want to make sure there's ample meetings around the state, and it's not just left to the committee to decide how many that is.
Right. Senator Hicks, follow up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you'll look at the memo that the last corporations they submitted that back to Management Council with a meeting location, meeting date, all of that stuff. So if we wanted to incorporate that, would maybe provide that direction. Representative Summer, just ask them first thing that they do is provide us a list of meeting locations and the meeting dates. And it's already laid out in the previous memo that we did last time we redistrict that. So they've got a template to work off of.
I was going to use that word exactly. Representative.
Yeah, so I think, Mr. Chairman, you know, there's a working friendly motion there. The simple fact of the matter is this council will meet to do its job after session and allocate resources. So it would not be unreasonable for them to report back to us at that point in time, first to allocate the necessary resources and have the input, which would be appropriate to do that.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to be clear in the motion, it was as soon as possible or as soon as practicable within this pseudo interim we're in. So we're also authorizing them to have a joint interim meeting between now and March 1st. I want to be clear that that was at least part of the intent of the motion, if it wasn't verbatim in the motion. Thank you.
You may want to go back and recap. And of course, I'm assuming Chairman Greer, you were saying use this as an overview, as a template as well. You want to respond to that, to your motion?
So, Mr. Chairman, yes, first of all, what Speaker Barlow said is accurate. They should be able to meet and and be authorized to meet in this winterim, as it's been dubbed. And then I also agree, Mr. President, that they should follow this existing format, which I think was part of my initial motion, is that they should review those materials and put together a plan following what was done in 2011.
All right.
That is now a very, very convoluted motion for the members.
I was just thinking, I was about to ask, is everybody comfortable with, do we need a repeat or a clarification, Representative Summers?
Mr. Chairman, I guess in that, I'm just wondering, will that include a report back to Management Council on what their proposed, I guess, whatever they are proposing, how they're proposing to do this? So we get the final review of what this looks like. That's what I want to see.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Again, yeah, I'm a strong believer in the golden rule, and he who has the gold makes the rules. And so if they put together their plan and come back to us for the resources to meet, then yes, we would have the final say.
So does anybody want a recap of this motion? You feel comfortable with what we've discussed? Do we want LSO to give us a recap? Let's just do that quickly. Who's tracking this for us? Matt? Oh, Heather.
Yep, that's me, Mr. Chairman. So we're using, the motion is the modified 2011 corporations interim topic template with authorization for the Joint Corporations Committee to begin their background research and work on this during the interim, during this winterim, by meeting at least once, and then to report back with a meeting schedule for regional meetings around the state to Management Council prior to March 31st.
Okay, everybody understand? Motion and a second. We're ready to vote? Go ahead, and Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Monsieur. Just a clarification to Matt. Is all that they will be reporting back to Management Council on just location of meetings? I would have assumed it was more the general plan.
Matt?
Mr. Chairman, so I just think Representative Schwartz, it's going to be a little premature for them to give you the full plan yet, because they won't actually know what that plan looks like until they get those redistricting numbers. So they could report to you such things as the redistricting principles that they've adopted, or if they've adopted any, or what they're considering. And that would be appropriate, but I think they won't be able to form how they will go about their work until they actually see those numbers.
Mr. Chairman, follow up then.
Go ahead.
So, thank you. Yeah, Matt, and that's the clarification I was looking for, that it's not just limited to location of meetings. It's whatever they essentially do in their winter meeting.
All right. Okay, at this point, I think we're ready to vote. Let's proceed. And I'll just add, if you want meetings to go to, there'll be ample supply of meetings. And we did work with the clerks. I remember going to all the clerks in all the counties out west, going with them, working with them. All right, we have a motion on the floor. Let's, we have to do a roll call on this one as well. Matt? No? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Ken, I think. Oh, okay. Those opposed? All right, motion is passed. We've got some directions to our corporation's chairs. Get busy. Anything else? We can move down now to executive session or other items to consider. Matt, anything else we need to talk about now?
I've got 3 quick things before we move to an executive session. The first is we've been asked about the Management Council last year authorized use of CARES Act funds for housing deposit reimbursements for those members who had made non-refundable or had committed non-refundable housing deposits for Cheyenne during the session that was then rescheduled. And the question is, if we reschedule again in March or unable then to hold a in-person session, would those housing deposits be available? We received about $25,000 in CARES Act funds. Of that, we've got $9,000 remaining. We can ask for more CARES Act money for this as well. And it was the Attorney General and the Governor's office was fine with that. They believed it hit the requirements. It was a nice benefit. They provided some surety to members to make reservations, and then if virus conditions aren't able to hold an in-person session, they're not out of pocket with the deposit. So if council wants to, we could consider another $25,000 request of CARES Act fund for this usage.
Directed to housing, as you've heard. Any discussion or comment on this? Everybody comfortable with this? Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm sure other members of this council and the legislature are hearing about the change in the federal government made to the CARES Act, extending the date, but the state has not yet. So I guess I'm interested to know, while we're getting some level of insurance maybe from the executive branch that going in 2021, this would be still acceptable. I think other programs and other entities are not getting that same level of assurance for activities that they undertook in 2020 and that have been carried over into 2021. So that's one just general comment. The second comment I would ask is, or information I'd ask the director to provide the council is how many members and for what total amount, not individual per member, but total amount were people were the last requests for. Because I think that might be of interest to the council, just in general, broad terms, of how it was utilized the last time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You follow up, anyone? Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. President. And maybe I'm the only one, but I'm a little reticent to do it again. Basically, waiving or allowing carte blanche to sign non-refundable deposits when we have this level of uncertainty. I understand the first time people might have been caught off guard, but I'd almost rather we just send out a note to the legislators suggesting that maybe they not sign non-refundable deposits that are substantial, or maybe we cap it or something. I had the impression that at least one legislator had a few $1,000s of non-refundable deposit. I don't think that should happen again. And so if we are going to go down this road, a cap would be rational, or a caution or something that prevents us from providing another 16,000 is what it sounded like of funds just out to non-refundable deposits. When I think that's avoidable just by going into the negotiation and saying, hey, this contract needs to be subject to the fact that there might be cancellation due to the pandemic. And I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that feels that way, but I'm a little reticent to just say, yeah, let's sign up 25K again.
I see your concern. Director Albrecht or anybody, does anyone know of those who have got themselves set up with non-refundables again?
Mr. Chairman, I guess to Senator Rothfuss' question first, I don't know of anyone yet who has signed up. It's simply a question I've got before they make those. And my understanding is, and this is just from the member, is that they've looked at available on the big online, rental by owner national websites. And in Cheyenne for that time, they can only find some that provide a full deposit return within 48 hours after making the reservation. So, and that's going through the large online firms for that. But that's secondhand is what I'm hearing from them. To the vice chairman's point or questions, I think we had between 8 and 10 members participate in this the first time, and Senator Rothfuss is right, it was the total of 16,000 that had been expended out of that. So we've got 9,000 remaining. That's another option for management council, is just to leave that for now. And but members would like some surety that if they make these reservations and if the session is delayed again, that they won't be need to pay that non-refundable deposit from their own pocket.
Well, there's 9,000 still left. Anyone else would like to comment? Anybody have a desire to extend or put additional funds in? Don't see a lot of support for that, so we'll move on. All right.
All right, Mr. Chairman, then, sorry, Vice Chairman Barlow has a question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Co-Chair Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, if we're not going to take any action, I think LSO knows that people that inquire on this, they can be informed that there wasn't at least sufficient support in the current management council at this point to provide them with that assurity. Is that, Matt? I mean, Director Obrecht's going to have a question. That's why it's here, because he had a question. So I want him to have some guidance from us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Noting that there is still some funds left, though.
Well, Mr. Chairman, there's funds left, but there's no authorization to spend those funds. So, and this member who has approached me about this, he's looking to make his reservation as soon as he can to be able for March. And so he wants to know whether that policy will be extended or not. And from what I understand is it won't be extended. So he's at his own risk when, and there may be future management council action taken. I wouldn't offer that, obviously, but I mean, we could revisit this at a later date.
There could be, but does anyone want to extend that 9,000? Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think given the number of new people coming in, if you've been through the ropes, you know how to go find a private house or a condominium or something to that extent. I would just say we extend the current funding that's available. And it's a first come, first served basis. So if it's exhausted, it's exhausted. But I would certainly hate to have somebody coming in, get stuck, not knowing the ropes of Cheyenne.
Senator Hicks, you have a motion. Is there a second to Senator Hicks's motion? Is there a second? Okay. Representative Greer seconded it.
It did, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion.
I'd like to amend it and cap it at $1,000.
Okay. There's a motion. Do we have a second on the amendment? We do. Senator Greer. All right. It's been, all those in favor of the amended motion, raise your hands.
Mr. President, sorry to interrupt. Point of order.
Go ahead.
I don't understand the motion. Is this a motion to amend the proposed motion? So therefore it's that we're voting on the cap is what we're voting on right now only?
Senator Hicks made the motion that we approve the 9,000 to continue. Representative Greer seconded, and then he made a motion which was seconded that says we're capped that at 1,000.
So this is a motion on the cap.
Mr. Chairman, and I would accept that as a friendly amendment to the motion.
All right. Okay, then on the amendment then, all those in favor say aye.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to make a point on it.
Go ahead. Discussion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess the one concern I have is now an equity policy. While I actually oppose extending it, because at least that's fair and equitable, the idea that we would have 9 slots for the first 9 legislators that screw up and sign an agreement and then pay out the agreement. And they're the winners. And the rest, we just say, no, I'm sorry, we ran out of money, is a worse policy than the nothing policy. So I can't support this motion as sort of the worst of both worlds.
Do you want to clarify who we're helping, who we're not?
I think that's a perfect example of a good legislative process, to say something good and screw it up. But I guess I would concur with Senator Rothfuss. So maybe I will withdraw that motion. If my second will withdraw, I'll make another motion.
It's been withdrawn and the second approves. Okay, we're open, brand new slate.
See if we can't make some more sausage here, folks.
All on rental.
All right, so the motion would be to extend the funding, that there would be no reimbursements until the date certain, say March 1st. At that point in time, and then LSO would make a pro rata distribution based on the available funding.
It's fine. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second
a
that.
second. All right, Representative Greer, second. All right, any more discussion? Any more discussion? There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's passed. Okay, that's passed. A little bit of money out there, Matt, that you can
Okay.
pass the word.
Mr. Chairman, one other thing, and this is just for council's attention. Previously, in the last management council, you increased the internet allowance that legislators could take advantage of from $30 a month to $60 a month, given how much more legislators were being expected to utilize their own internet. We used CARES Act funding for that. We don't have any more. I'd have to go ask for more. Certainly happy to do that, but just want to know if you want to include that extension now that the CARES Act has been extended another year.
Go ahead, Representative Yin, and then Representative Summers, in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my question is to Matt about how many people took advantage of it over the course of the last year. Thank you.
Let's take one more, Representative Summers, and then you might have another question. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this was just a comment. I'm the one that brought that motion. I probably wouldn't bring it now because I think we're into a more limited time frame of being virtual right now. But so I'm not going to bring the motion. I brought it the last time.
All right. I think that kind of summarizes it. Representative Greer.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, and I wanted to ask a question of Representative Summers, because he was paying much more than $60. And so I assumed, or at least that was my understanding, I assumed that you would submit receipts for that, or you just ate the difference. And then getting back to Representative Yin's question is how many people felt.
We lost you. Are you still there? How many people went?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman. And then, yeah, just in an answer to Representative Yin's question would be helpful.
Yeah, follow up on that. Representative Summers, weren't you bouncing off a satellite for a long time there? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I ever submitted any. I might have one time. I ended up taking, to be honest, yeah, I've spent up to $250 a month on internet just to do this because of satellite. But in the end, I took some per diem and used like half per diem to cover that cost. So I didn't use it, but I would be interested in, Matt, how many people use that?
Go ahead, Matt, follow up to those questions.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't. It is less than 15 members have used that.
Okay. Any thoughts, any follow-up, any desire to continue? Doesn't look like it, Matt. Looks like
okay, great. Last thing, Mr. Chairman, before we go into the security briefing and executive session, the Joint Ag Committee has asked for another half day meeting to receive a report from the Forest Service. You've got that in your material.
It's always a good report. I like to attend it. Mr. Floor Leader Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unless there is discussion, I move to accept the request by the Ag Committee to allow them to have the additional time.
Moved and seconded by both Greer and Summers. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. All right, it's passed. We got a couple that said no. That's okay. All right, it's passed. Matt, did that do it?
Vice Chairman.
Sorry. Go ahead, Vice Chair. I didn't see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to be clear, the half day that Ag wanted, that's in the winterim. Are we not giving, should we be giving all of our committees some level of latitude to have a half a day meeting to, at some point in this winterim, to do educational things? We just did it with Ag, and we did it with corporations previously, I think, to give them that latitude. So I just, we don't have to do it right now maybe, but think about that. If we want our committees to go to work, let's actually give them authority to go to work. Thank you.
Sure, but we've only had the two committees ask, right? Mr. Robrecht. Okay, go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think typically Ag always has this meeting with the Forest Service during the session, and it's kind of the timing of the year, the time of the year. So I suspect it's more about those people had already blocked off time, and so that's why they needed to do this. I think if other committees have something that's urgent, they can, but I would rather go committee by committee if they have a issue.
Yeah, it should work. Forest presentation's always interesting. They tell us why we lost our 700 jobs in our community at the timber mills. Anyway, folks, what else? All right.
Yep, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, we got Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no other business, I would move that the Management Council resolve itself in the Executive Committee.
Second.
Executive Commission.
All right. That's
Mr. President?
Oh, whoa. Who said something?
That's Chris.
Okay. Mr. Floor.
Mr. President, while we're in public, we usually announce why we're going into executive session in a vague concept for security discussions as part of the motion, for example.
Thank you. And we are moving into executive session to discuss security at this point.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And Mr. Chairman, this will end our YouTube feed for the day as well. And just to be clear, we don't have any more public comment.